Okay.
Yeah.
So next speaker is Martin, who is going to be speaking about, I guess, Showergel, even though the title doesn't mention it.
Well, just at the beginning and the end, because yeah, I'm back from Liquidshop3 and still worked on Showergel since. So I wanted to give some feedback about what I've been doing, what I learned. And this is shaped like a tutorial, which is targeting maybe beginners. So I think most of you following the conference already know what I will talk about, but just in case, keep an ear because we might, I think I provided an overview also of what I tried over the past 2 years. Just a quick note of context. So my name is Martin Kirchgessner. So I'm a web developer. I mostly work with Python these days. And my background in the radio is at Radio Campus Grenoble, which is a community radio in the French Alps. So it's a very classic community radio. We have live shows, recorded shows, much music. And we have been using Liquidsoap for more than 2 years now. We are quite happy about it. It's been really stable, worked very well. But I also, from the beginning, developed Showergel, which is a kind of companion app for Liquidsoap. It provides, for example, a live view of what's playing in the screen in the studio that you can see on the right here. So I will, in the conclusion, I will explain what Showergel becomes these days. But for overall, and I think everybody in the conference will agree, we always have to do a kind of overlay to Liquidsoap. I mean, it's the first thing that the documentation mentions. Liquidsoap will not have a database or a graphical interface. And well, for many things, at least the schedule, the logging, or just having a screen in the studio, well, we need to have that. So I will give some hints and share my experience about how to develop such applications. I will describe the various ways to do that and what is available in Liquidsoap, and discuss a little bit also about what it's like to evolve from a Liquidsoap 1 to Liquidsoap 2, because Showergel was designed with Liquidsoap 1 in the beginning. I will also have the same complaints as Peter before, because scheduling is hard. So as a developer, if you want to interact with a running Liquidsoap script, there are 2 ways. Liquidsoap can call your app, and I will start with this method because I think it's the simplest. And then we'll see how you can send commands to a running Liquidsoap instance. It's fine to use both from the same application. That's what Showergel does. It depends on the feature. We'll see which one exactly later. So let's start by the simplest method. Call your application directly from Liquidsoap. I think the very simplest one is to call a command line process. This goes very well with request.dynamic and process.read in your Liquidsoap script. So basically, request.dynamic will call a function that will call your program anytime it needs to load something next. The upside of this method is that it will call your program, I think, like 30-40 seconds before the end of the current track. That works very well for music, and this is how we schedule music in our radio. All our music is held by the Beats music library. It's a command line music library. I'm giving here an example of a Beat invocation. So you can ask a random file, and you can also ask it to only output the path to the file it picked. And the last arguments are filters on the library. So here I am querying recent files who have been added less than a year before, and reggae files. So it just prints the path to the file I want to play, and this is what, so that on the upside I'm showing what I test in the terminal, and this is what Liquidsoap can do with the following example. So the request.dynamic is a source in Liquidsoap. I added a retry delay of 1 second. Usually it never retries, but this is in the case of things go bad. For example, if we messed up our filters or things like this, it's better to leave some room for the CPU instead of looping. And we create a request based on what is written by process.read with any parameters we want, and this is how we pick music with different styles at different time in the day. Another way to call your application from Liquidsoap is to use HTTP calls. If your application has an HTTP server, in Liquidsoap we have all the HTTP verbs, and this is great for metadata. For example, we can post it directly to Showergel, but also directly to our website, who has a WordPress plugin that can store and display the current playlist. It looks like this, and I wanted to mention, if you go for this method, beware of metadata. I have seen many things in metadata, from empty metadata to more than a megabyte of metadata, because there was cover art or lyrics in multiple languages, many things. So Liquidsoap has great operators for that, cover.remove and export that can be useful. Or you can do the way around and only use metadata.artist and title to be a little more lightweight. Just note that I'm sending the metadata in a separate thread, just in case anything go bad or slow. It will not go against the playout thread. So from with these two methods, I can already interact with my other application from the Liquidsoap script. Now we can also do the way around and query Liquidsoap externally, which means that you have to connect somehow to Liquidsoap. So currently Liquidsoap supports both telnet and HTTP. Well, the telnet is the legacy method. It's just a setting to enable, and well, we can force the IP address it will listen, or the port, or even listen on a Unix socket. And it's telnet, so you just send a message, pass a simple text response. It's pretty basic, but it works fine. But it's indeed a legacy protocol. For example, the Python standard library has a telnet package, but it will disappear in a few years because it's not maintained and it's really slow. So I think if you start writing an app right now, don't bet on telnet. And maybe instead on HTTP. Since I think Liquidsoap 2, we have the server.harbor, which provides the same interface as telnet. It will open, you can open, that's what we see on the right side. There is a web page we can use in the browser to test exactly the same thing as the telnet server. It can also be used from your application. You can directly post to that endpoint the command and get a response. So it works the same. It's pretty easy to adapt from someone who used the telnet before, for example. And at this point, I forgot to mention that you can also add your own HTTP endpoints, but I refer to Ewan's presentation, which was really great on that point. Sorry for that. That hole in my presentation. I wanted to note about the server.harbor that it has a downside with because it uses the same configuration as the Harbor input. So in this example, I'm binding the harbor on a custom IP address, and I'm using both the harbor and the harbor input, and the log lies a little bit because it's not listing on that address. But also, it could be a public address, and that's what we do in production, because the harbor, the input, the streaming input, is bound directly on the server's public IP address. It was much simpler that way. So I'm sticking to telnet for now because of this. I would love to have a separate configuration for the harbor input. Would be a great thing, especially because telnet was much more configurable. We could even put it on a Unix socket. Also, I'm wondering if WebSockets wouldn't be more a better fit for this use, because we send many messages to Liquidsoap, as we'll see next. Because I'm sending many comments to Liquidsoap, so I wanted to give an overview of the ones I'm using. Well, at least the help. It's simple, but it's always a reminder of what's available. It would be great if there was a little description of the command beside, but well, that would be just a bonus. And I wanted to note for other developers, just a reminder to always use ID in Liquidsoap. Everything has an ID argument, and my advice is to give an ID to everything, even to operators, because usually the ID that appears in the logs is the outer, is the ID of the outer operator. So that's very important to have clearer logs and clearer command names. So yep, always yeah, default IDs are horrible indeed. The first commands I used were output commands. These were really useful. So I have a main output, which is the audio output on that machine. And it's great it's the most efficient way to implement a skip button, for example. It managed to skip whatever is playing behind, well, except streams, but I'll get back to this. It also provides quite reliably the metadata, although it is not filtered, so sometimes it's, well, a megabit message, but it works. It's also useful to have the remaining time. The computation is pretty good. And I know that people use it in the studio to make a transition from the automaton to the live show, for example. Another important command is, of course, pushing requests. So you need to add a source, which is a request queue with a meaningful ID again. And then the most important command is, of course, to push a new URI or the path to a file, so you can push something to play out. This is very interesting for a scheduler, and you can still flash and skip, and that works very well. So maybe that can, in some cases, answer the show duration issues we were talking about before. So that works great. You can also have the list of request IDs. Maybe if you have seen in the logs Liquidsoap complaining about too many request IDs or things like that, because every file loaded by Liquidsoap is a request and has an ID, which is a number. And by the way, we always have those 6 commands, but I didn't have much luck with them. I don't know if they are legacy or really maintained, but generally, well, didn't find much use of them. I was really surprised by request.onAir, for example, who sometimes even returned 2 request IDs, although only one was playing. It would be interesting to maybe trace request ID that might be interesting, but yeah, this looks old. So maybe avoid these. Commands are also very useful for HTTP streams. For example, I'm using only one HTTP input, and I set it with a strong buffer, firstly. Don't forget, even if it messes up your schedule, it's better to have a large buffer than some stutter in the stream. And I also set the input to not start with the script, so that way when the script starts, the HTTP input doesn't move until I pass the command .start with the scheduler and stop at the end when I don't want to. And what's useful with this setting is that I can also change dynamically the URL of the input. If at some point I want to change to listen to another radio, you can just set the URL, stop at the end, and this works really nice. There is an equivalent for the Harbor input, although in that case, everything is handled in the Harbor parameters, especially the authentication. But it's good to know that there is a stop command if you want to maybe kick someone out of here. The status is also very useful because it makes a difference between offline, buffering, and playing. So that's interesting to monitor what's happening from the application. But at this point, when using all of these sources, and I get back to the previous presentation somehow, the problem is scheduling and scheduling exactly. So passing commands is fine, but they may not work. Maybe we are trying to play on an URL that is not available. The worst is a stream that kind of stutters because the line is too slow. Sometimes files or folders disappear. So when writing application, you have to keep this in mind. Liquidsoap really cares very well about this, but the application we make also have to take this into account. I have seen folders disappear, many red things. So my advice is to act like a chaos monkey when testing this. Or if you have a stream, then unplug the internet. If you rely on files, remove the drive or things like that. It's really interesting to listen to what happens to your script in those cases. And the other difficulty is having an exact schedule. When we push a command to Liquidsoap, it's processed very quickly, but there are many things starting behind. So for example, when pushing a request, it starts the download of the request. If it's a local file, usually it's fast enough, we don't notice, but if it's a distant file, well, it has to wait a few seconds. And the same goes for HTTP streams. When we push stream.start, actually it only starts the playout a few seconds later because it starts with a minimum buffer, so that usually incurs a 5-second delay. That's something we tolerate, but it depends on your policy. And as Peter mentioned previously, switching sources always leave the previous source as it was. So that could be in the middle of a song or a show. And if it's a stream, there might be more content in the buffer. So recorded sources, shows or songs can be skipped with Liquidsoap. It's a bit harder with an HTTP buffer, for example. So we have to be careful about this on the Liquidsoap side this time. It's always a matter of being track sensitive or not in the switch and fallback operators. For music and recorded show, I have stuck with the default track sensitive behavior. I still flush or skip when switching something, But our policy in our radio is that we enqueue shows one after the other. So even if one is a bit longer, well, it's usually 1 or 2 minutes more, so it's fine that other shows will start later. A few others will make shorter shows, and overall it worked nice so far, and it was simpler to implement, of course. For streams, well, I chose to let the stream take the lead on the broadcast. So when they are online, they start broadcasting, and that's it, and we keep it until the end. Again, that fits with our policy. We are pretty cool radio who doesn't care much about being precise at the second, but if you really want, it's really hard to do, but that's another presentation, so we discussed it enough, I think. I just wanted to mention another strategy. I think I saw this in LibreTime. I noticed that they had not only one request queue, for example, but two. I think they have even more. But in this example, you could have 2 request queues, and you pass them to an amplifier operator, which is driven by an interactive variable. And that's an interesting thing, because when pushing comments to Liquidsoap, for example, in that example, I'm transitioning from track 1 to track 2, and you can push the file you want to play out. And you can just update the volume of this one and lower the volume of the old one. And later on, you can flush and skip the previous file. Of course, you could even crossfade that way, I think. That would be too long for my slide, but could be. So that's another strategy. It's interesting. I didn't follow it because it's a bit dangerous. Because if we do that, well, we would have to care about the availability of sources, and that's too bad because Liquidsoap does this very well. But for example, if we put a source at a null volume, at least it could flush the HTTP buffer, so that's an upside. But we would have to care that the full volume source is really playing, and I have seen some cases where, for example, you are handing a full volume to an HTTP string which is not available, so it could be a streaming silence in that case. But for HTTP streams, it could be something we want, especially when they just stutter a little bit from time to time. So that's a very complex topic, being on time. I don't have a magic solution. Sorry about that. But as a conclusion, I'm really happy to have so many options with Liquidsoap. We can call the applications in different ways. The connections are pretty versatile too. We can do it with HTTP. I could implement my own HTTP endpoints, still pass via the command line. So there are so many choices, and that's great about Liquidsoap, aside the stability. It's full of dangers, but I think I said it enough, so you know it very well at this point. But yeah, it's really the Chaos Monkey strategy was very well during my test and very interesting. For example, I used a delay with a switch for to insert automatically some jingles every few 10 minutes or 20 minutes, and discovered that when an HTTP stream stutters, it just started to insert jingles all around. That was a bit weird. So we need to test much and to break everything when testing. So I haven't said many things on Showergel, but it's still live on the radio, on the FM here. It now has a quick install script, so if you have a fresh Linux box, you just launch the script and put some files in the folders, and it starts broadcasting. And it comes with a kind of quick start, a basic Liquidsoap script, which is a longer illustration of the examples I gave in this presentation. So you can also refer to this one. But for those who were at the first Liquidshop, initially I wanted to make an application able to plug to any Liquidsoap script. I think that was too hard, because there are so many possibilities in scripts, so many sources, so many combinations and all. I'm stepping back a bit on this idea. So I think I will progressively hide the Liquidsoap script, which is behind the application, to the point that, well, I will have made yet another radio automaton, but I think I knew that from the start. So it's maybe I changed the name, I don't know. It still works and it still targets community radio with a simple setup within and the simple architecture. I will follow that way, but I see where it goes from time to time. And well, for other developers, and especially those who are starting with a Liquidsoap, so be careful. There is a heavy coupling between the application and the script, because you have to, of course, you have the difference in the connection strategy, but also the sources and operators, how you handle failure and all. And my advice is to test on have a test machine before updating Liquidsoap, even for bug fix releases. Sometimes things disappear in a bug fix release, and yeah, it's better to have this surprise out of broadcast, of course. Just a message for Romain and Sam. Maybe I have a suggestion about the documentation. Would be great to compile the documentation, and I'm thinking here on the online documentation. If we could see the modification date of each page in the documentation. Also to have flags on functions to know whether they are new, experimental, legacy, or even deprecated. That would be great to follow what's changing. The online API documentation also has a separation between core and extra, and I still don't understand the difference because well, both are available. Also, if this flag already exists, maybe put more of them. I haven't seen enough, I guess. But what I really wanted to say is thank you for your support on Slack, on GitHub. You've been really helpful. Thank you for holding this conference. It's very interesting so far, and thanks for letting me talk about this adventure.
Thank you very much, Martin. I think it was a great presentation of some of the possibilities offered by Liquidsoap, and I'm glad you did that. And I guess it would be quite useful to many people. So, do we have questions here or comments or? So yeah, one point you raised, which is interesting, is the precise scheduling of requests. I think it's important, and we really need to have that. So I do have some ideas about. So basically, we could make requests available from a precise time, and I guess this is really needed. We didn't think of it so much for now because we consider that when you push something into a queue, it was almost instantaneous. But since you are facing problem, I guess it's a really legit problem, and so we should address that. Gilou, do you have something?
Yeah, I said it in the chat, and I was like, why did you not go further in the way of implementing your API that you need using HTTP, pretty much like UN did? You said, like, I need WebSocket because I need to do a lot. I mostly don't disagree about having WebSocket support. I guess that's cool enough to have. But what did you lack something in HTTP? Because my idea was like just expose everything as HTTP API using Arbor and go for it.
Yeah, no, it's more security laziness because in my context, I want to keep the sysadmin simple because we are 20 people and not all of them are aware of firewalls, Docker, and also I'd like to keep it simple. And the problem is that if we currently open the harbor on the public IP address because we do much distant streams, and that will open the command interface to the internet, and also I'm quite reluctant on this. I know it's easy to work around.
It's not that easy, but yeah, using either HTTPS and some form of authentication is not so hard. But you could be maybe included in the HTTP way of the HTTP work for Liquidsoap. But then of course you can just reverse proxy it. But I guess you don't want to go that way for the reason.
Yeah, and the harbor input has authentication, but the rest of the harbor doesn't have. So I think it would be interesting to have a distinct configuration settings so people don't mess
for the API.
What's going on here. Yeah.
But maybe that's a good idea, like exposing HTTP API separate from the actual sources for harbor. That might be a technical endpoint versus source endpoint. I don't know. Somebody, if you have an idea. I don't know. Maybe it's Romain.
Maybe rather Romain, I guess. Maybe Romain can comment on this.
Yeah, and plus, yeah, well, we uncovered some weird way of manipulating the HTTP stream in Liquidsoap as well. So,
well, I think for all these things, it's always good to lean on the tools that have been heavily crafted for that, and I think that NGINX as a reverse proxy would be my guess. Yeah.
Well, putting NGINX in front of the HTTP harbor, the input, would be a bit too complicated, and I feel it like a bit like a regression compared to the telnet interface, who could be even a local, a Unix socket. So you just really keep local what has to be local. That is inter-process communication. But yeah, I know I'm a little bit picky on that one.
Lazy, maybe. That's good.
Yeah.
It just depends on your need and the level of. It's always a trade-off, you know. If you're not too worried about getting port scan or DDoS or anything, I think you can definitely expose your harbor and do the authentication with like a header, which is how most API are done. So the new API for HTTP that I talk about should really make that pretty easy to do, because you can also do middleware. Which I didn't have time to talk about. So that means that you can register a authentication function that would be executed for every request in your stack as soon as it's registered as a middleware. And that would make it very easy to implement authentication. And if you're not too worried again about DDoS and stuff like that, then in this case, you have a solution right there that you can expose directly to the internet.
Great. Well, I look forward to this. Yeah.